A very good afternoon to you for tuning in and or listening in. Thank you so much for making time to listen to these conversations on this platform that I've forged or am actually forging with the hopes of creating a space where we can demystify postgraduate studies specifically. And by demystifying, I mean to just move away from many of us viewing postgraduate studies as this daunting, scary, sometimes depressing journey or thing to go through, and to see it for what it is, a privilege and an opportunity to use the knowledge that we have in relation to other people's knowledge to create new knowledge. And I have one special person this afternoon in conversation with me who will also be sharing their knowledge. And I'm so grateful that they took some time to have this conversation around navigating, in her case specifically, a master's qualification. I have with me today, and I just told her that I'm very self-conscious about name pronunciations, but I have with me the lovely, the brilliant, super smart Mamodibe, who's going to have a conversation with me today about her master's dissertation. I'm really excited to speak around this topic and to hear a bit more from her because I know the pages are limited when it comes to the dissertation, but what's in our mind and some of the other findings that we couldn't write in our studies sometimes live on in our minds and in these kinds of conversations. So I'm hoping we can tap into those as well. But thank you so much for this opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I'm hoping you can speak as much as possible today and allow me to sit back and just take in. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I must say you reawakened my passion for this project. We recently bumped into each other at a symposium, and just all of these conversations. I think we sometimes just overlook the kind of work that they do for us as the researcher. So
Yeah.
you've written the patient, you submitted, and it's sitting there somewhere in the library. But these conversations just reignite the passion for the project. They reignite even ideas. So thank you for having me.
Oh, that's brilliant. No, I'm glad that I could be a partial sort of trigger to help reignite a part of you that I really think is such a precious and important part of your personality and part of who you are. Because I think there's so much knowledge that you can share with us. And in today's conversation, hopefully share with people who are also entering the master's journey or are within the master's journey to learn a few things about coping on this journey, right? And producing a solid piece of research that one can be proud of and later on hopefully publish. But before you get into the deeper academic stuff, what I say to a lot of my guests is that I think it's also important to humanize these academic papers and theses and dissertations that we produce, just so that current master students, current postgraduate students feel a sense of, oh, okay, it's ordinary human beings behind
Yes.
these projects. So these projects are really not these daunting things that are done by specially picked people, right? So that
Mm-hmm.
in that vein, if you could just walk us through for a couple of minutes through who you are, right? Just a bit of historic context about you, specifically based on your academic journey and professional journey. You can go as far back as like primary school to just walk us through the journey until where you are right now today as this brilliant emerging academic or scholar.
Yeah. Um, I think I've always had a knack for learning. I've always been such a curious child. And I'm so grateful that that was always harnessed and like encouraged. My maternal grandparents had a huge impact in terms of my learning and my being in my formative years. Um, and one of the things that my grandmother has this very fond memory of me as a child growing up, that I think it was around obviously around 95, 96, it had to be, or slightly after. She says that every time Nelson Mandela would come on screen and like speak to the nation, I would like go up, climb up tables, sit next to the TV and just start like, imitating him. And, in I think someone will just be like, "Oh, that's just a child imitating," like that's just what children do. But like that's a moment of recognition of learning as well. Like you've seen something, and you're interpreting it, and you know that there's an audience to be spoken to. So I also remember having a very fond relationship with my preschool principal. And she was always excited to have me. Like, even there was a time when they needed to move me from like different one nursery school to another, and this principal was like, "This child is not going anywhere. Like, she's one of my best students." And we're talking with, I don't know, childhood development stuff. So I've always been curious. I've always enjoyed reading and writing. Um, I did many I state fits in school, public speaking, debating. And I think that was always a confidence booster, because that was always something that was celebrated. When I came back from when like school had just closed, and it was the last day of school, and the routine was that we go visit my grandparents, and the first thing they want to do is they want to see a report. They're like, yeah, school is closed, but how did you perform, and so that has always been in the fabric of shaping who I am, and like the aspirations that I have, and just that this is a very important part of my life. And to be honest, when I started pursuing the artistic realm of things, um, I didn't realize that this would come out of it. And I know I'm going all the way to the university part, but in high school, um, I went to a traditional high school. So I took economics, accounting at some point, history, and business. And so the arts were an extramural activity for me. But my mother was very supportive in terms of, applying yourself to dramatic theater, and pursuing that as a career and doing it professionally. So I'd always maintained good grades. I needed to. That was what I understood. Um, but I didn't realize that there was a genuine passion for academia in me, particularly when I started then pursuing postgraduate studies, because also in the realm that I function in, it's not something that is always valued. It's not something that is always taken in cognizant into the practice of the industry. So, but I've embraced it. I realized that I can't run away from academia.
I'm so glad.
Even first year varsity, I have this vivid memory of myself and my very close friend, whom I coerced into being my friend, because there were a lot of like there were a lot of like partner and duo type of assignments in the dramatic arts, like scene work and pair work. And you almost have to kind of like pick out who's the strongest link in this many links of people. And we were determined not to just be great performers on stage, but that even our written assignments, our academic work, was also just of high rapport. And that was like again, it could just be wanting to do great in a particular space, but I think it was planting seeds. But now retrospectively, it was just revelatory to me. Like, I actually love academia. I love the learning. I love the knowledge production. I love contributing to knowledge. I love advancing knowledge. And that actually this space has become a space where I'm starting to realize now that is absent of people who look like me and sound like me and speak like me. So when I eventually decided that I'm doing my master's, it was a no-brainer for everybody around me. They were like, yeah, it was a matter of time, actually. You've taken longer than what we expected. And within that journey, I discovered that truly I've got a bone for this, I've got a knack for this, I'm invested, and this is important, and I see the value in it. And I see why it matters and why it exists, even in the arts specifically. So that's been my journey.
Interesting. That is so wholesome. Thank you for that. And as you were relating the story, especially the varsity part, in my mind, I'm like, because I'm aware you did your undergrad at Wits University, right?
Yes. Yes.
So in my mind, as you were relating, I'm like, I wonder what her relationship was with FVPA. We had such a
Can I post for 2 seconds?
oh really go ahead.
Can I
Because
post?
wow, FVPA.
So, First week of varsity, you know the structure. It's a complete culture shock, right? You don't know what's what until you know what's what. And I think was about 2.5 weeks into the academic program, and this one girl in my class was like, "Hey, you guys are always chilling during lunch. Don't you know that we have a submission next week for FEPA?" And I was like, "Nobody told me." I
My
was like,
gosh.
"Nobody told me I've got a submission for FEPA." I'm like, "Where did you discover all these things?" And then she says, "What do you mean? Go to Sakai. There's a student portal. They put up everything on Sakai." And I'm like, "What's Sakai?" She's just like, "You're going to fail." At this point, you're going to fail. So I made it my mission to go to the library during lunch to find out what I had never logged onto the student portal. I didn't know what it was. I was going to lectures and going home hunky dory. Everything was fine. And I had about over 15, 20 notifications for, assignments and things like that. And I think what was it was just a wrestling, man, and adapting to the space. But it was fun because when I went to a public school, and so it's a survival of the fittest type of mentality. So I was like, okay, here's a challenge. And I don't live in an environment where people understand what I'm doing, so I have to kind of figure it out all by myself. And thankfully, there were tutorials. I went to tutorials, and we banded as a group, some of us who didn't know that this assignment was coming up. I taught myself the coursework because we had an amazing professor. I forgot his name, but I just think I couldn't understand him. Like the concepts were too complex, they were new. Remember, I went to traditional high school, so I hadn't interacted with some of these concepts. And so I had to teach myself the course. I had a huge Oxford dictionary, and every word I didn't understand, I understood it first, and then I would go back and literally just like teach myself and go to the tutorials. I My first assignment in varsity, I think I got like 90, if not 95%, and that was FEPA.
Okay.
That was FEPA.
That is worth boasting because people have had such complicated relationships with MVPA. Like I had a friend who dropped MVPA in one of the semesters. I think they were just like enough, and they dropped it. And another friend of mine carried on. We were in media studies together. He carried on and he did pretty much okay-ish. But a lot of people in media studies would complain, like, why did I pick up this module? Why did I take this course?
Yeah.
So I always wondered when I hear about people in the arts and humanities advanced, I'm like, I wonder if they took FVPA and what their relationship was with FVPA.
It was compulsory for us, I think, up until third year. And now I see its value even as an artist, creating work, meaning making, all of those things. It's such a fundamental part of learning. I mean, concepts like the old age, representation from Stuart Hall, it remains relevant. It's I think as an artist, from an artist perspective, I can see why they made it compulsory throughout all our years. And I think it
Yeah.
does a rewiring because in high school, you're so used to the nature of a curriculum that says you learn concepts and you apply. But
Mm.
APPA already was asking us to begin like negotiating, and it's beyond application, right? It's like, what do you mean representation is a concept on its own? It's not exactly what it means. Like, this is not an image, it's a representation. You're just like,
Mm-hmm.
you know so I think the complexity of it, I can understand why people would just like walk away from it. But artistically, it's such an important module to study.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm so glad. I'm really glad to hear sort of positive um expressions about FVPA.
you know
And for our viewers, it's basically it's Mamodibe, it's film, visual, and performing arts, right?
yes, yes.
FVPA, that's the full name of it. But yeah, like I said, people had complicated relationships with it. You're gonna say
They,
something
I
before
was
I cut
gonna
you
say,
there, sorry?
people mustn't think I'm being biased because I'm a nerd. It's a really lovely module. It's a really
It's
lovely
quite
module.
wholesome.
It is. It is. It is.
So thank you so much. Thanks for humoring me in terms of MVPA. And thank you again for that lovely historic bit of historic detail, right, in terms of who you are on an academic basis. Then now you decide to do the master's. I want to know, what was it? Was it a moment? Was it a person? what was the moment of like, I'm going ahead, I'm registering for my master's and I'm doing this thing? What was that moment? Or who was that person? Or like, how did it come about, the decision to do the master's? And then a bit of the journey on how you landed on the topic as well.
Yes. Two things. I think I want to emphasize because I think sometimes these conversations, especially once you have conquered, you're on the other side of a degree, people think it's always the smartest in the room, the boffin, that my trajectory has always been upward, and it's really not the case. I think particularly in high school, things got a bit tough, like grade 11, grade 12, things got really, really tough. I mean, I think I was just above like a 70, like wasn't always up there. And even in university as well, when the demands of like, now I'm not just a student. I mean, I was also a student in the era of fees must fall, the first in
Mm,
74, and twice in my academic year, so 2015 and 2016. And so navigating academia and being very much involved in that movement, and not just being a student now, but being a young adult navigating life, it wasn't always easy. And I didn't think at the time that I would be a candidate for a master's degree, because again, the idea is it's always the dark scholar, the cum laude, and I mean, I did maintain my A's, but it's still not enough. We know masters are very competitive programs, and they're becoming more and more competitive. But also, I was transitioning from a dramatic arts theater department to now a film and television department. So I've always had the aspiration.
different institution, by the way. You were
Different
doing it at a
institutions.
different institution altogether, also. Yeah. Yeah.
I went to the place where they make the things happen. I went to the place where the standard of film and television is way up there. So that was another hurdle to climb. But I've always had this aspiration of furthering my studies. In fact, I think the initial desire was to do it abroad. And I'm still very much open to that possibility, either for another MA or for, I don't know, postdoctoral stuff. So God has a lot to do with this story, because in failing to get access to then this international institution, it was a private institution. I had acquired a partial funding bursary, but I couldn't make up the rest of the funds to then go and study there full time. And so I was a bit discouraged. And I guess this is also part of the journey of navigating postgraduate studies, that it's it's a tough it's so tough. It's
No,
tough
it
because
is.
you're navigating so many complexities, and depending on who you are and where you come from, that makes it even much more difficult. And depending on even the field of study, I think some of the things that had been quite discouraging on my journey in trying to pursue a master's degree was seeing the limitedness of funding within this department, within the faculty of the arts.
Yeah.
First humanities, and the arts is just worse. It's like, oh, oh, nobody wants to pay the artists.
I know we struggle. Yeah.
Nobody wants to fund, arts education. And yet we live in an
Mm,
entire globe where we're consumers of this thing. And it's like, why is there this gap? That's another intervention of study. But why is there this gap of undermining arts education as an integral part of learning? And yet, on the professional level, people expect the very unfunded, if there's such a term, unfunded body to be greats in the industry. How do those two things correlate? And I think what makes it complicated is because some of these things are talent based, but we know now, particularly in film and television, it's a skills based industry. Learning how to edit, how to storyboard, or all of these very technical production terms. um, so yes, it was a very much a God moment. I was looking for funding for an arts degree during the pandemic, and that was not anyone's priority. So I had to walk away from going to this international institution, and then about 6 months into 2021, I just shut up. I had been praying consistently. I really had. I am a woman of faith, and it was just about the right time and the right moment. And I had released all my energy, and I was like, you know what, Lord, it, I'm gonna do this one more time, but this time don't let me be humiliated, you know. um, and I didn't initially have funding, but I worked extremely hard in the first couple of blocks of my coursework so that I could get the grades to then give me merit awards, which it really worked out well. So it helps to get good grades. It helps to be exceptional. So that was my moment. It was after a long. It's interesting that your question is actually revealing another struggle with another journey, right? That I
Yeah.
had been working towards an international acceptance, and that didn't work out. And then I was like, you know what? Let me pivot
Yeah.
locally, and there'll still be much more time to explore this at an international level. But also, having studied then at UCT, I'm realizing that we have the best education in the continent. We really do. And I think maybe it's my own journey of reckoning that, and I think I'm developing this language now, that we need to stop idolizing the global north as the source of knowledge production and knowledge excellence. No, no, no.
We have we have it good here, and I'm also glad you brought that up. The two of us actually we share an acquaintance or a friend who has actually studied abroad, and we're not going to name them. And in a lot of our conversations, they often reiterated that it was so eye-opening for them to learn that actually the sometimes the pastures are not greener on the other side. The South African tertiary education system is excellent, and they had that reckoning. They had that aha moment of, oh my God, we really don't have to overly, celebrate and chase after international qualifications in that sense. I mean, there's value in them, right, for ourselves and our personal growth. But he felt and he saw that what we have in South Africa at tertiary level is actually top notch and excellent, which was it was so great for me. Such a such a beautiful piece of insight that also made me chase less after international kind of recognition and qualifications as well. So thanks for raising that as well.
Yeah, I think, and this question is coming up for me now as we're having this chat, that perhaps the conversation back in the 90s, because I remember I had an uncle of mine who, I think it was around late 90s, early 2000s, he was sent to go and further his studies in the UK. And I think at the time, I'm not so knowledgeable about what the politics were, but I know, of course, because of the racial history, a lot of Black people were, prohibited from doing certain
Mm.
things. Um, and I think because of those reasons of the racial structure of the country, and because Bantu education, we know, was not the best, that of course going abroad meant being more skilled and more educated than the average person. But I think we need to start redefining what it means for us to seek out knowledge in the global north. Is it because we're trying to edify or make or qualify ourselves more, or is it which I think is what we're walking into now, is it's more of a knowledge exchange, a collaboration, because I think that's where we're at. I think what the research has shown and what being in academia has shown is that knowledge production does not belong to one place. um,
Mhm.
and the difference in knowledge production does not make it lesser than the other. So I think perhaps it's more of a, if I am going to be pursuing a PhD, or being a postdoctoral fellow internationally, it's not because I think that institution is better, but is it advancing or is it an exchange? I think the language needs to change about why we're adopting global north knowledge as means to advance in academia. I don't know. Those are just.
So well said as well. And I'm hoping viewers or postgraduate students who will be watching this episode also get that sense of not feeling less than
Mm,
when one
mm,
doesn't qualify for Global North to get into Global North institutions. and also just being honest about the reasons why a lot of us want access to these institutions, because there are some valuable reasons. There may be a scholar whose work will particularly be resonating with you, and you'd love for them to be your study leader and supervisor, so you'd want to follow them to their institution. But there are many other valuable reasons, but we should oftentimes just be honest about the core. Why is it that we so significantly want access
Mm,
to those institutions, while we can have knowledge sharing happening from right where we are? We can still write from where we are and still collaborate in terms of knowledge production from where we are. Thank you for that. There's a whole lot to get into there, but what we are here today is your beautiful piece of work, your master's qualification, your master's mini dissertation that you had produced, which I had read a couple of pages over the past 3 days to get a proper sense, of where we are, what the paper was about. Really exciting stuff as well, and links to actually one or two of my current students at honors level that I'm supervising for their mini honors research report. So I was like, oh, if I could just bring you in and have you supervise
listen,
them and walk them
listen.
through this journey,
Let's talk after the talk.
Yes, please, let's have that conversation. Um, but yeah, so here we are. We are registered for the masters. We have an idea of the topic. Inspiration behind the topic, and then the development of the topic. Then you can also touch on areas about the study that you'd like for the two of us to focus on, in terms of the theories that the theories within which you had framed the study, what the data was that you had focused on, and then the two of us can speak on some of the findings later.
Um, I was actually, I remember I had another. Oh, yes, I remember. So when I when I when I submitted for the MA, I think they had asked for a research proposal. And initially, my area of interest was South African rom-coms, the film sector, South African rom-coms, and their tendency to create this utopia in terms of location and filming. So I was exploring this idea of, wow, I'm digressing, but I really want you to hear this.
Yeah, that's fine. I want to hear it.
And initially, my interest was around every time I watched local South African rom coms, I know that they usually, particularly, when genre moves, it adapts. But what I was finding interesting about rom comedies in South Africa is that they really were married to the Hollywood template. And so, what was particularly interesting for me was the dating scene and the regions in which these films were being documented. So like a Maboneng, a Joburg CBD, and the romanticization of the safety of Black women in those spaces. And yet it contrasts the real thing, right? Like if you're a Black woman dressed in a particular way, navigating those nightlife spaces, dating spaces, it's not safe. But these
Yeah,
films tend to portray this sort of like utopia, and it's like, where are these women, and where in Maboneng or wherever else it is in Braamfontein can you walk like this today and not be groped, harassed, kidnapped, you know and so because I had sat with that research idea for quite some time, and I did speak to my supervisors about it like here and there, she was like, I think you know the outcome of this paper already, and I don't think you're gonna. I don't think you're gonna have a good time writing something that you've been studying with for so long. And she wasn't negating the fact that it's a good study, but I think she knew that I could offer more.
yeah.
And then my second idea was what happened then to be my paper. And when I was applying for this MA, my mentor said to me, I don't know if you're familiar with her, Unon Demiso Smang. She studied at Rhodes.
Yes, I think I've read a paper or two, but I
Yes,
definitely know the name. I haven't met her.
yes.
Yes, yes.
So she taught me at Wits, and then subsequently she became my mentor thereafter. And she was just like, that topic is going to change. It's not going to be that one. And speaking specifically to the rom-com one. So this one, I think my initial reluctancy to follow through with it was because I was like, what exactly am I talking about? And where are the resources to back what I'm saying? Like, even from inception, I was not finding papers that, remotely were near the kind of argument I was trying to propagate. And that was extremely frustrating because I think we had spent the last summer holidays going into the writing year trying to read stuff, so that we
Yeah.
can come back with, like, a proposed hypothesis. And I was like, I don't know if this is a good idea. I'm like, there is something there, but I'm not finding articles. I don't even know if the language for what I want to say exists. I feel like I'm groping in the dark for something and hoping, it was really a struggle. And little did I know that the initial struggle was actually catapulting like many other struggles. I should have known. I should have known in the beginning that if it's hard to begin, it's going to be hard to move, So the inspiration, I think, also came from, I was thinking about at the time, I don't know what I was watching. But when you're in scholarship like this, like television studies and film studies, you have to be watching stuff all the time. But I was particularly interested at first in Black women as protagonists on television, on screen, which is something that we hadn't seen as a country. Before The Throne, before Gomorrah, I'm not too certain about telenovelas specifically highlighting Black women as lead, and them sort of driving the narrative. And and then I think I sort of started, I had to do the inverse work of going, what exactly is it that I am passionate about? And the thread for me has always been Black womanhood, like, all the time. And when it came to this paper specifically, I think I spent part of that 1 month of trying to find resources, just going back to stories, going back to self. And I don't know how I landed there, but I ended up going back to stories about my mother, my maternal grandmother, and other Black women in my life, and almost trying to see the similarities between what I was at that time wrestling with the word transgression and how this translates on screen. I don't know why specifically that. I need to journal so I can remember why I have these ideas. But I had to. My positionality was very much something that my supervisor encouraged that I don't shy away from, and particularly she was like, also, this is an industry where you actually practice, and you might be talking to another version of you. And so this dissertation became very personal very quickly because I'm theorizing in an industry that I'm also working in, and I'm bringing it home. And very close to home in terms of positionality, but very close to home in terms of concepts, like widowhood and motherhood and those things that are greatly tied to, Black culture. So it was the inspiration. It was force majeure. I was forced. I was forced to dig deep. I was really forced to dig deep, but I'm glad I did because it ended up just opening up so many ways of thinking for me during the writing process.